The red taillights ahead of me weaved through traffic like a drunk snake, and I knew this was going to be one of those nights that changes everything. Detective Jack Leland, 15 years on the force, and I'd never pulled over my own wife before. But there she was in that silver BMW, doing 60 in a 35 zone, with some jackass riding shotgun. And that's a nice ride, my partner Pete Gorman said, adjusting his radio. Probably stolen. I hit the sirens and watched the BMW reluctantly pull to the curb. My stomach twisted into knots as I recognized the vanity plate, RSX3L. My wife Rachel's car, the one she claimed was at the shop getting detailed. "Jack, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Something like that. I stepped out of the cruiser, my hand instinctively checking my service weapon. Not because I expected trouble from criminals, but because I was about to face something much worse than any street thug. The driver's window rolled down, and there was Rachel, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. Her lipstick was smudged, and her silk blouse was buttoned wrong. Next to her sat a guy who couldn't have been older than 25, wearing a smirk that made me want to rearrange his face. "Evening, ma'am," I said, keeping my voice professional. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Rachel's green eyes went wide when she recognized me. For a split second, I saw panic flicker across her face before it hardened into something cold and defiant. "Hello, Jack. I was just giving Colin a ride home from the office." Colin. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. This was Colin Travers, the crypto hotshot she'd mentioned at dinner parties. The one she always described as brilliant and ambitious. The one she'd been texting at all hours, claiming it was work-related. "At 11:30 on a Tuesday night?" I asked, noting how Colin's shirt was also disheveled. Must have been some important business meeting. Colin leaned across Rachel, his cologne mixing with the smell of sex and lies. "Officer, we weren't doing anything wrong. Just a couple of adults having a conversation." "Detective," I corrected him. "And I clocked you doing 60 in a 35. License and registration, please." Rachel fumbled through her purse, and I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. A hotel keycard from the Marriott downtown. The same hotel where she'd claimed to be attending a conference last weekend. Pete appeared at the passenger window, his flashlight illuminating Colin's face. "Well, well, Colin Travers. Fancy meeting you here." Colin's smirk faltered. "Do I know you?" "You should. You're wanted for questioning in a crypto scam that bilked 3 elderly residents out of their retirement funds. Colin Travers, you're under arrest." The next few minutes were a blur of handcuffs, Miranda rights, and Rachel screaming that this was all a mistake. But what burned into my memory was the look Colin gave me as Pete loaded him into the back of our cruiser. "You're too late, detective," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "She already made her choice, and it wasn't you." I watched Pete drive away with Colin while Rachel sat in her car, crying crocodile tears. When I approached her window again, she'd composed herself enough to deliver the final blow. "I suppose you think you've won something," she said, her voice as sharp as broken glass. "But you haven't. This doesn't change anything between us." "Maybe not," I replied, noticing a fresh scratch on her neck that definitely wasn't there when she left for work that morning. "But it sure as hell changes everything about you." She started the engine and rolled up the window, but not before I heard her mutter, "You're not man enough to stop this, Jack. You never were." As I watched her taillights disappear into the night, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and betrayal were still there, but they were being overshadowed by something else, something cold and calculating. "Game on, honey." The next morning, I woke up in our king-sized bed alone, which wasn't unusual anymore. Rachel had started sleeping in the guest room months ago, claiming my snoring kept her awake. Now I knew the real reason. She needed privacy for her late-night text sessions with Colin. I found her in the kitchen, dressed in her power suit and sipping coffee like nothing had happened. She looked up from her phone with the same fake smile she used on difficult clients. "Good morning, Jack. Sleep well?" "Like a baby," I lied, pouring myself coffee from the pot she'd made. "How's Colin doing? I imagine county lockup isn't quite as comfortable as the Marriott." Her smile flickered but held. "I have no idea what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo I'd taken of the hotel keycard in her purse. "Room 412, the penthouse suite. Expensive taste for a work meeting." Rachel set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "You went through my purse? Standard procedure during a traffic stop. Amazing what people carry around these days." I took a sip of coffee and watched her face. "Want to tell me how long this has been going on?" Nothing is going on, Jack. Colin is a client, a very important client, who could make or break my career at the PR firm. Right. And I'm sure your career requires you to service him personally. The mask slipped completely then, and I saw the real Rachel underneath. The one who'd been lying to my face for months, maybe years. You want to know the truth? She said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. Fine. Colin makes me feel alive again. He's young, successful, and he actually listens when I talk. When's the last time you asked about my day, Jack? When's the last time you made me feel like a woman instead of just another piece of furniture in this house? So this is my fault? Everything's your fault. Your job, your attitude, your complete inability to see what's right in front of you. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I'm late for work. We'll talk about this later. Will we? Or will you be too busy with another client meeting? She paused at the door, her hand on the knob. Colin's lawyer will have him out by noon, and when he is, we're going to finish what we started. The door slammed behind her, leaving me alone with my coffee and a growing sense that my 15-year marriage was over. But instead of feeling defeated, I felt something else entirely, motivated. I called in sick to work and spent the morning going through Rachel's things with the thoroughness that had made me a good detective. What I found made my blood boil. Hidden in her jewelry box was a second phone, a cheap burner that contained months of text messages between her and Colin. The messages started innocent enough, discussing marketing strategies and client presentations, but they quickly devolved into something that made me want to put my fist through the wall. The worst part wasn't the explicit photos or the detailed descriptions of their encounters. It was the way they talked about me. The old man, they called me, dead weight, a fossil who doesn't know how to satisfy a real woman. But the message that really got to me was from just last week. Don't worry about Jack. He's too stupid and too scared to do anything about us. We can do whatever we want. I set the phone down and stared at my reflection in Rachel's vanity mirror. 42 years old, graying at the temples, 20 pounds heavier than when we got married. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a washed-up cop whose wife had outgrown him. Then I remembered Colin's smirk from the night before, and something hardened inside me. They wanted to play games? Fine. But they were about to learn that 15 years of police work had taught me a few things about playing dirty. Pete found me at my desk the next morning, looking like he'd wrestled with his conscience all night and lost. Jack, we need to talk. I looked up from the case files I'd been pretending to read. What's on your mind, partner? It's about last night, about Colin Travers. Pete sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk. The guy made bail this morning. His lawyers already filed a complaint about harassment and unlawful arrest. Unlawful? The bastard was wanted for questioning in 3 separate fraud cases. Yeah, but his alibi checked out for 2 of them, and the third victim just recanted her statement. Says she made a mistake. Pete rubbed his forehead. Word is, someone paid her off. I felt a familiar rage building in my chest. Let me guess. Colin suddenly got expensive legal representation. The best money can buy. And Jack. Pete hesitated. There's something else. The complaint mentions your wife. Says you used your position to harass them because of a personal grudge. Personal grudge? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Pete, the man was screwing my wife. I think that qualifies as personal. I know, buddy, and I'm sorry, but Lieutenant Harris wants to see you in his office, now. Lieutenant Harris had been my boss for 8 years, and I'd never seen him look as uncomfortable as he did when I walked into his office. He was a good cop and a fair man, but he was also a politician who knew which way the wind was blowing. Sit down, Jack. We need to discuss last night's incident. What incident? I pulled over a speeding vehicle and my partner arrested a wanted suspect. Everything was by the book. Was it? Because Colin Travers' lawyer is painting a very different picture. He's claiming you used your badge to settle a domestic dispute. I leaned forward in my chair. Lieutenant, are you seriously going to take the word of a con artist over one of your own detectives? I'm trying to protect you, Jack. This Travers kid has connections, and his lawyer is pushing hard for a formal investigation. Internal Affairs is already asking questions. The message was clear. Back off or face the consequences. But I'd never been good at backing down from a fight. What do you want me to do? Take some time off. Let things cool down. Come back when this blows over. And if it doesn't blow over, Harris sighed. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. I stood up and headed for the door, but Harris called after me. Jack? Whatever you're thinking of doing, don't. These people have money and influence. They'll destroy you if you give them the chance. Thanks for the warning, Lieutenant. I'll keep that in mind. But as I walked out of the police station, I was already formulating a plan. Rachel and Colin thought they could use their money and connections to make me disappear. They thought I was just another obstacle to be removed. They were about to learn how wrong they were. My first stop was the impound lot, where Colin's BMW was being held as evidence. The car was a beauty, a brand new M5, with all the bells and whistles. The kind of car that screamed, "Look at me, I'm successful." It would be a shame if something happened to it. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car across from Rachel's office building, watching her colleagues arrive for work. The PR firm of Henderson and Associates occupied 3 floors of a glass tower downtown, and Rachel was their star account executive. At exactly 9:30, I saw Colin pull up in a rental car. He was dressed in an expensive suit, his hair perfectly styled, looking like he owned the world. He walked into the building like he belonged there, and I felt my jaw clench, but I forced myself to wait. Patience was a virtue I'd learned during countless stakeouts, and it was about to pay off. At lunchtime, Rachel and Colin emerged from the building together. They were trying to look professional, but I could see the way they looked at each other, the way Colin's hand lingered on her back as he opened the car door for her. I followed them to an upscale restaurant downtown, staying far enough back to avoid detection. They were seated at a corner table, leaning close together and whispering like teenagers with a secret. That's when I made my move. I walked into the restaurant and approached their table with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Well, if it isn't the happy couple. Mind if I join you?" Rachel's face went white, but Colin just smirked. "Actually, we do mind. This is a private business meeting." "Business meeting? Is that what we're calling it now?" I pulled out a chair and sat down anyway. "I have to say, Colin, you're looking pretty good for someone who spent the night in lockup." "That was a mistake that's been corrected," Colin replied smoothly, "along with the complaint I've filed against you for harassment." I nodded appreciatively. "Smart move. Using your girlfriend's husband's arrest to cover your tracks. I have to admire the strategy." "Jack, please," Rachel said quietly. "You're making a scene." I looked around the restaurant, noting the other diners who were starting to stare. "You're right. This isn't the place for a family discussion." I stood up and leaned close to Colin's ear. "Enjoy your lunch, hotshot. And enjoy that rental car while you have it. Things have a way of disappearing when you least expect them." Colin's smirk faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Is that a threat, detective?" "Just friendly advice from someone who knows how the world works." I walked away, leaving them to finish their meal in peace. But as I reached the door, I heard Colin say something that stopped me cold. "Don't worry, baby. After tonight, we won't have to worry about your husband anymore." I kept walking, but my mind was racing. What did he mean, after tonight? What were they planning? I guess I was about to find out. That evening, I sat in my car outside the Marriott Hotel, watching the entrance and wondering what Rachel and Colin had planned. I didn't have to wait long to find out. At 8 o'clock, Rachel's BMW pulled into the parking garage. She was alone, dressed in a black cocktail dress that I'd bought her for our anniversary 2 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Colin arrived 15 minutes later in his rental car, carrying what looked like a briefcase. They met in the lobby, and I watched through the glass windows as they embraced like lovers who'd been separated for years instead of hours. I gave them time to get settled in their room before making my move. The desk clerk was a kid who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and he barely looked up when I approached. "NYPD," I said, flashing my badge quickly. "I need to speak with the guests in room 412. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Just routine follow-up on a complaint." "Nothing to worry about." The kid shrugged and went back to his computer. I took the elevator to the 4th floor and walked down the hallway until I found room 412. I could hear voices inside, and I pressed my ear to the door. "Sure this will work?" Rachel was saying. "Trust me, baby. By tomorrow morning, your husband will be facing charges for stalking and harassment. My lawyer's already prepared the paperwork. But what if he fights it? With what? His word against ours? I've got 3 witnesses who'll swear he threatened me at the restaurant today, and the hotel security cameras will show him following us here." I felt my blood run cold as the pieces fell into place. They were setting me up, using my own investigation against me. Colin's arrest, the complaint, even this hotel meeting. It was all part of an elaborate plan to destroy my career and my reputation. "What about after?" Rachel asked. "When this is all over?" "After, We'll be free to do whatever we want. Maybe take a trip to the Cayman Islands while the divorce goes through. I've got some business interests there that could use attention. And the money. Your husband's pension, the house, everything. My lawyer says we can make a case for emotional distress. You'll walk away with half of everything, plus damages. I'd heard enough. I knocked on the door, 3 sharp raps that echoed down the hallway. Room service, I called out. The voices inside stopped abruptly. I heard footsteps approaching the door, and then Colin's voice, suspicious now. We didn't order room service. Complimentary champagne from the management, for the honeymoon suite. I heard Rachel whisper something, and then the door opened. Colin stood there in a hotel bathrobe, his hair mussed and his face flushed. Behind him, I could see Rachel pulling a sheet around herself. Surprise, I said, pushing past Colin into the room. Hope the first M not interrupting anything important. The hotel room was a mess of scattered clothes and empty wine bottles. The briefcase Colin had been carrying was open on the desk, revealing stacks of legal documents and what looked like photographs. Jack, what are you doing here? Rachel demanded, clutching the sheet tighter. Just following up on some police business. You know how it is, honey. A cop's work is never done. I walked over to the desk and picked up one of the photographs. It showed me sitting in my car outside Rachel's office building, taken with a telephoto lens. Another showed me entering the restaurant where they'd had lunch. Nice surveillance work, I said, flipping through the photos. Very professional. I especially like this one of me at the hotel entrance. Great lighting. Colin stepped forward, trying to look threatening in his bathrobe. You're trespassing, detective. I'm calling hotel security. Go ahead. I'm sure they'd be very interested in these photos, especially when I explain how you've been using their hotel to conduct illegal surveillance of a police officer. Rachel stood up, still wrapped in the sheet. Jack, please. Let's talk about this like adults. Adults? Is that what we're calling this? I gestured at the rumpled bed and scattered clothes, because from where I'm standing, it looks like a couple of children playing dress-up. I picked up another document from the briefcase, a legal complaint accusing me of stalking, harassment, and abuse of power. My name was highlighted in yellow throughout the text. This is quite a story you've cooked up, I said, reading through the complaint. Very creative. I especially like the part where I allegedly threatened to kill Colin if he didn't stay away from my wife. That's exactly what you did, Colin said, his voice gaining confidence. And I have witnesses. Do you? Because I seem to remember our conversation being much more civilized. I pulled out my phone and pressed play on a recording app. My voice filled the room, clear and calm. Enjoy your lunch, hotshot, and enjoy that rental car while you have it. Things have a way of disappearing when you least expect them. Colin's face went pale. You recorded us? Old habit. Amazing what technology can do these days. I stopped the recording and put my phone away. Of course, this is just the beginning. See, while you two have been playing house, I've been doing some real detective work. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a thick manila folder. Colin Travers, age 26, originally from Miami, dropped out of college after 2 years. Moved to New York with $40,000 in student loan debt and a gambling problem. Colin tried to interrupt, but I kept reading. 3 arrests for fraud, 2 convictions overturned on technicalities. Currently under investigation by the SEC for running an unlicensed cryptocurrency exchange. I looked up at Rachel. Did you know your boyfriend's been stealing money from senior citizens, honey? Using their retirement funds to pay for fancy cars and hotel rooms? Rachel looked at Colin with confusion. Is that true? It's all lies, Colin said quickly. He's making it up to turn you against me. I pulled out a photograph and handed it to Rachel. It showed Colin at a casino in Atlantic City, surrounded by stacks of chips and expensive bottles of champagne. This was taken last weekend, while you thought he was in Boston on business. Turns out, Colin's been using his investors' money to fund his gambling habit. The FBI is very interested in talking to him. Rachel stared at the photograph, and I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. There's more, I continued. Bank records showing wire transfers to offshore accounts, emails discussing how to launder money through shell companies, and my personal favorite, a recording of Colin bragging to his friends about how easy it is to manipulate lonely housewives. That last part was a bluff, but Colin's reaction told me I'd hit close to the mark. You're lying, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Rachel, ask yourself this. How does a 26-year-old dropout afford a BMW and penthouse hotel suites on a marketing consultant's salary? Rachel looked back and forth between us, and I could see her world starting to crumble. The man she'd risked everything for wasn't the successful entrepreneur she'd thought he was. He was a con artist who'd been using her just as much as she'd been using him. "I think I've seen enough," I said, closing the folder and heading for the door. "Enjoy the rest of your evening. Oh, and Colin, you might want to check your bank accounts. I hear the FBI likes to freeze assets when they're building a case." I left them there in their hotel room, surrounded by the wreckage of their plans. But as I walked down the hallway, I could hear them starting to argue, their voices growing louder and more desperate. The trap had been set, and they'd walked right into it. But this was just the beginning. Before I was done, they'd both learn what it felt like to lose everything they cared about. Just like they'd tried to do to me. The next morning brought the kind of chaos that makes a cop's heart sing. I was sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, when my phone started buzzing with calls from Pete. "Jack, you need to see the news. Turn on Channel 7. I grabbed the remote and flipped to the local news station. The lead story made me smile for the first time in weeks. Federal agents raided several locations in Manhattan early this morning in connection with an ongoing cryptocurrency fraud investigation. Colin Travers, 26, was arrested at the Marriott Hotel downtown and charged with wire fraud, money laundering, and operating an unlicensed securities exchange. The camera showed Colin being led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled and his perfect hair disheveled. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of Rachel talking to FBI agents, her face a mask of shock and humiliation. My phone rang again. This time it was Rachel. "Jack, I need your help." "Do you? That's interesting, considering you were planning to destroy my career yesterday. Please." The FBI seized my car, my bank accounts, everything. They think I was part of Colin's operation. I took a sip of coffee and savored the moment. "Were you?" "Of course not. I had no idea what he was doing. You have to believe me, the same way I was supposed to believe that Colin was just a client." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Rachel spoke again, her voice was small and desperate. "What do you want, Jack?" "Nothing you're capable of giving me. Honesty, loyalty, respect, those ships sailed a long time ago." "So that's it? You're just going to let them destroy me?" "I'm not letting them do anything, Rachel. You did this to yourself when you decided to climb into bed with a criminal." I hung up and went back to my newspaper. But the peace didn't last long. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at my front door. I opened it to find Simone Walsh, Rachel's best friend and lawyer, standing on my doorstep. She looked like she'd been up all night, her usually perfect appearance disheveled and strained. "We need to talk, Jack." "Do we? Because last I checked, you were helping your friend plan my downfall." Simone pushed past me into the house, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "That was before everything went to hell. Rachel needs your help." Rachel made her choice. Now she gets to live with the consequences. "You don't understand. The FBI thinks she was Colin's accomplice. They're talking about charging her as a co-conspirator." I closed the door and followed Simone into the living room. "And you think I should care because you're her husband? Because despite everything that's happened, you still love her?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Love her? Simone, your friend spent months lying to my face, planning to destroy my career, and stealing money from my accounts to fund her affair. What part of that am I supposed to love?" Simone sat down on the couch and rubbed her temples. "She made mistakes, Jack. But she doesn't deserve to go to prison. Doesn't she? How many senior citizens did Colin steal from while Rachel was helping him spend their money? She didn't know. Bullshit." I pulled out the folder I'd shown Rachel the night before. "Your friend knew exactly what Colin was doing. She helped him set up shell companies, introduced him to potential investors, and even used her PR firm's resources to create fake marketing materials." Simone's face went pale as I showed her the evidence. Bank records, email exchanges, photographs. It was all there in black and white. "Where did you get this?" "I'm a detective, Simone. It's what I do." I closed the folder and set it on the coffee table. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" She stared at the folder for a long moment, then looked up at me with something that might have been respect. "You planned this whole thing, didn't you? The arrest, the FBI investigation, all of it. I just connected the dots. Colin and Rachel did the rest themselves. And now you're going to watch her go to prison." I leaned back in my chair and studied Simone's face. She was scared, not just for Rachel, but for herself. As Rachel's lawyer and friend, She'd probably been involved in some of Colin's schemes without realizing it. That depends, I said finally. On what? On how cooperative everyone decides to be. The FBI is very interested in recovering the stolen money. If someone were to provide information that helped them do that, they might be willing to make a deal. Simone's eyes widened as she understood what I was offering. You want Rachel to testify against Colin. I want Rachel to tell the truth, for once in her life. And if she does, then maybe she gets to spend her golden years in minimum security instead of maximum. Maybe she gets to keep the house and a small part of her dignity. Simone stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the street where FBI agents were still processing Colin's rental car. She'll never do it. She thinks she loves him. Then I guess she'll have plenty of time to think about that love from her prison cell. Simone turned back to me, and I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was weighing her options, trying to figure out how to save her friend and herself. What about you, Jack? What do you get out of this? I stood up and walked to the door, holding it open for her. I get to watch justice being served, and I get to sleep peacefully at night, knowing that the people who tried to destroy me got exactly what they deserved. Simone walked to the door, then paused and looked back at me. You know, I always thought Rachel was lucky to have married you. Stable job, nice house, faithful husband. I never understood why she threw it all away. Neither did I, but I'm starting to think it was the best thing that ever happened to me. After Simone left, I sat back down with my coffee and newspaper. The phone rang several more times, reporters wanting comments, colleagues offering support, even a call from Lieutenant Harris, asking if I needed anything. But I ignored them all. I had everything I needed right here, a front row seat to watch Rachel and Colin's world burn down around them. And the best part? I hadn't had to break a single law to make it happen. I'd simply done what I'd been trained to do: investigate, gather evidence, and let justice take its course. Sometimes the system actually works. And 3 weeks later, I was sitting in a federal courtroom watching Colin Travers plead guilty to 17 counts of wire fraud and money laundering. The prosecutor had painted a picture of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had stolen over $2 million from elderly investors. Rachel sat in the gallery behind the defendant's table, her face a mask of devastation. She'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks, her perfect facade finally cracking under the weight of reality. The judge sentenced Colin to 8 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay full restitution to his victims. As the bailiff led him away in shackles, Colin looked back at Rachel one last time. The love and adoration that had once been there was gone, replaced by something cold and accusatory. Outside the courthouse, I found Rachel sitting on a bench, staring at nothing. She looked up when I approached, and I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. 8 years, she said quietly. He'll be 34 when he gets out. If he gets out. Federal prison isn't like the movies, Rachel. A pretty boy like Colin won't last long with hardened criminals. She flinched at my words, but didn't argue. The FBI wants to interview me again next week. Simone says they might offer me a deal if I cooperate fully. Smart move. Colin's already thrown you under the bus to save himself. Might as well return the favor. Rachel looked at me with something that might have been curiosity. Why didn't you testify against me, Jack? You had enough evidence to put me away for years. I sat down on the bench beside her, maintaining careful distance. Because despite everything you've done, you're still the woman I married 15 years ago. Somewhere under all the lies and betrayal, there's still a part of the person I fell in love with. Does that mean you forgive me? I was quiet for a long moment, watching people walk by on the courthouse steps. Lawyers and defendants, victims and families, all caught up in the machinery of justice. No, I said finally. I don't forgive you. What you did was unforgivable, but I don't hate you anymore either. Mostly I just feel sorry for you. Rachel wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. I never meant for it to go this far. It started as just excitement, something to make me feel alive again. And look where it got you. Your career is over, your reputation is destroyed, and the man you threw everything away for is heading to federal prison. I know, I've lost everything. I stood up and looked down at her, this broken woman who had once been my wife. No, Rachel, you didn't lose everything. You gave it away. There's a difference. I started to walk away, but she called after me. Jack? What happens now? To us, I mean. I turned back one last time. There is no us, Rachel. There hasn't been for a long time. The divorce papers are already filed. You can keep the house until the FBI decides whether to seize it as part of Colin's assets. After that, you're on your own. And you? What will you do? I looked up at the clear blue sky, feeling lighter than I had in months. I'm going to go home, open a beer, and watch the sunset from my back porch. Then tomorrow, I'm going back to work doing what I love, being a cop. Will you ever think about me? Probably, but not the way you'd want me to. I walked away then, leaving Rachel sitting alone on the courthouse steps. As I reached my car, I could hear her crying, but I didn't look back. That chapter of my life was over. 3 months later, I was sitting in that same back porch chair, drinking a beer and reading about Rachel's sentencing in the newspaper. She'd gotten 2 years in minimum security and 5 years probation in exchange for her cooperation against Collins' associates. The house had been seized by the FBI, and she'd moved in with her sister in New Jersey. According to Simone, who still called occasionally, Rachel was working as a waitress in a diner and attending court-ordered therapy sessions. Colin had been transferred to a federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania, where he'd reportedly been beaten up twice by inmates who didn't appreciate con men who stole from grandparents. As for me, I'd been promoted to detective sergeant and given a commendation for my work on the cryptocurrency fraud case. Lieutenant Harris had apologized for doubting me, and Pete had bought me dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town. But the best part wasn't the promotion or the recognition. It was the peace I felt sitting here in my own space, answering to no one but myself. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, I thought it might be Rachel, but it was from my sister Mara, who lived in California. Saw the news about your promotion. Proud of you, big brother. When are you coming to visit? Naite. I smiled and typed back. Soon, I think I'm ready for a vacation. Naiteo. And I was. For the first time in years, I was ready to move forward instead of looking back. Rachel and Colin had taught me an important lesson. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's just living well while your enemies destroy themselves. I finished my beer and went inside to start packing. California sounded good right about now. Palm trees, ocean breezes, and 3,000 miles between me and all the drama. As I closed the door behind me, I took one last look at the empty house across the street where the Hendersons used to live before they moved to Florida. A for sale sign sat in their front yard, and I wondered who would move in next. Hopefully, someone boring. I'd had enough excitement to last a lifetime. But as I headed upstairs to pack, I couldn't help but smile. Rachel had been right about one thing. I wasn't the same man I'd been a year ago. I was stronger, smarter, and a hell of a lot more careful about who I trusted. And if anyone else wanted to try to destroy my life, they'd find out just how much this old detective had learned about fighting back.